The eyes of the nation are turning to the Keystone State as election 2020 enters the home stretch. What messages are Keystone, Pennsylvania voters looking to hear from the respective candidates? And will the congressional races have an impact on the presidential election's outcome? John Cole, the managing editor of Politics PA, joins us to break down the latest in the race for the White House. That's all coming up right here, right now. I'm Sam Chen, and this is Face the Issues. Good evening and welcome to Face the Issues. I'm Sam Chen. The eyes of the nation are turning again to the Keystone State as the 2020 election heads for the home stretch. In 2016, Pennsylvania's slim margin of victory to then candidate Donald Trump is what put him over and into the White House in the Electoral College. What will happen in 2020? Attention is being paid to Pennsylvania and especially to the undecided voters across the state. John Cole is the managing editor of Politics PA and a friend of the program. John, welcome back to the show. It's good to see you.
Thanks for having me back, Sam. And it's crazy. It's the first time we had was 2 years ago. We were talking about how important the 2018 midterms are. Right. Here we are, the 2020 election, and the whole country is watching Pennsylvania right now.
Absolutely, and it's fascinating because you were here with us at the very start of season 3. And we began that episode talking about the storylines to pay attention to in 2020. And I don't think we predicted half of the storylines that we ended up paying attention to in 2020. But here we are. There's still an election that's going on. The race for the White House is on. We are past Labor Day, which means that people are starting to tune in and really pay attention to that race for the White House. I want to start with asking you about the conventions that we just came out of. The Democratic National Convention went first. The Republican National Convention followed exactly 1 week later. Both largely virtual conventions. How do you think they did, and do you think they spoke to people like voters in Pennsylvania that both candidates need to win?
So that's a really good question, Sam. First thing I would like to address is that due to the coronavirus pandemic, like you said, the conventions were virtual. And that's really interesting because it's the first time we've ever had to do something like that for these conventions that draw, again, thousands and thousands of people in arenas usually, to hear the nominees speak. So on the technical end of things, I think the Democratic Party and the Republican Party were happy with the way that there weren't any major technical difficulties with such a program with millions of eyes across the country watching. In terms of messaging, it's pretty obvious that both parties were making a point to try to speak to Pennsylvania voters. Something just quickly that stuck out to me during the Democratic National Convention, they had different themes each night, just like the Republicans, and each night basically centered around a couple of people that were average everyday voters from Pennsylvania for both conventions. So it goes to show you that there's definitely eyes on the Keystone State that they wanted to at least appeal to. And not just out of the everyday voters, we can even talk about elected officials from the state that spoke. For the Democratic Party, usually their big rising star keynote address is selected for one person that's a rising star in the party. So years ago, it was Barack Obama in 2004, and later on it was Julian Castro. So each year they usually pick it for one person. But this year the Democratic Party had the idea of, since we're doing it virtual, we're going to do a combined video message with, I believe it was 17 rising stars in the Democratic Party. 3 of them were from PA in that video. And that's the most of any state featured in that video. It was Representative Connor Lamb out in Western PA, Representative Brendan Boyle in Philadelphia, and State Representative Malcolm Kenyatta in Philadelphia. So it goes to show you that in their rising star thing, they wanted to feature 3 Pennsylvania elected officials, and that's more than any state they did there. They had average everyday voters as well. For the Republican National Convention, one of their keynote speakers as well was Sean Parnell, Republican candidate for Congress out in Western PA, who's challenging Connor Lamb. So it goes to show you that Republican and Democrats alike had candidates and everyday people featured in the convention. So it's certain that they were making it a point to appeal to the voters of the Keystone State.
Is there anything you saw in either convention that you looked at and said, I don't think that's going to play well in Pennsylvania? Now, obviously, these are national conventions. They are speaking to a national audience. But when Pennsylvania voters watch those, is there anything that jumped out at you that you thought, ooh, I'm not sure that's going to play really well?
That's awfully tough to say, Sam, because again, they're speaking to a national audience. So I think I can't say there's anything specific that stuck out to me that would really get anger of the average undecided Pennsylvania voter, so to speak. One thing I guess that I remember, but I don't think this would maybe sway the undecided voter. One of the first speakers for the Republican convention was kind of speaking out against the teachers union. Now, I think most of the union voters are, I guess the teachers union are already probably lining up behind former Vice President Joe Biden. But a speech like that might drive more of them to be interested in. But I don't think that's a constituent. I don't think that's really a swing vote. You know what I mean?
Sure.
Like most of those teachers, public school teachers, and the teachers union have lined up behind Biden already. So I don't think there's anything specific that really would turn off either of them. Because I think, again, they were trying to speak to a national audience. Yeah.
Well, let me ask you then about the messaging specific. Now, after the conventions, both candidates have really made a beeline for Pennsylvania. And this is not unsurprising, not surprising, but it is a little bit in the sense that Vice President Biden had up to this point largely been campaigning virtually. But both candidates have since shown up in the state with many more trips planned. What message do they need to make? What do they need to argue for in this state in order for them to win?
So it's pretty clear that both campaigns have their own unique messaging for the state. President Trump's campaign has held a series of different events from Trump himself, two different surrogates like Vice President Mike Pence, Ivanka, Eric, and Donald Jr. They've all campaigned in the state on his behalf for different events. The Trump campaign has specifically talked a lot about the economy and saying that prior to COVID-19, they talked about the economy really doing well in the state. And they're saying that as the coronavirus pandemic is going on, they believe that when this ends, that the economy under President Trump will go back to what it was and even better. So I think they're certainly making that pure economic message to the voters of the state, saying that, hey, whenever this pandemic ends, and we don't know exactly when it's going to end, but they're trying to instill confidence in voters that the economy will be what it once was. And that's the thing that President Trump pulls highest on, is the economy. Now, the Biden campaign has certainly made a different pitch, where they have kind of pinned the blame on Trump's administration for the coronavirus pandemic outbreak. They believe that the president's administration didn't make the right calls early on, and then eventually did not ultimately help stop and slow the spread of the virus. So the Biden campaign points to the economic numbers now and saying, look, this is because the administration acted too slow in their opinion. So, and they're also making that pitch along with, I think the Biden campaign talked a lot about healthcare as well. That's something where Biden is pulled consistently higher than Trump, where Trump is pulled consistently higher on the economy. So I think that's something that's a certain wedge between the two campaigns in terms of messaging.
John, let me ask you this. The Biden campaign has made a fairly conscious shift in recent weeks from a heavy focus, as you mentioned, on the COVID-19 pandemic. Still focusing on that, but they have made a conscious shift over to the question of the race relations in America, a lot of the protests that we're seeing. Does that resonate with Pennsylvania voters?
So polling still is, I've seen various polls that have said it benefits Biden, but it doesn't really benefit him that much. We don't know. I think some of the riots may be able to switch, maybe change some votes in the suburbs perhaps. But as of now, it doesn't seem like that's the driving force behind people to the polls as of the most recent polls. Now, however, Sam, that's still, this election, the narrative seems to change every other day with the big story. So again, that could change. But I'm saying as of now, I don't think that has been the determining factor for Pennsylvania voters.
Sure. And I would tend to agree with you. I think you look at what people care about is largely going to be what impacts their everyday life. And COVID-19 impacted everybody across the country, whether medically or due to work or unemployment or the economy going down or schooling. It feels like everybody has some kind of had been impacted in some way, shape, or form by COVID-19. But that's not necessarily true with the race relations question, where certainly all of us should be concerned, all of us should be paying attention, and all of us should be calling for justice. But it hasn't impacted everybody in the same way. And so that's where I'm always curious as to whether or not shifting that way really speaks to the undecided voters in states like ours. And so I would tend to agree with you. And also, like you said, the polling, we'll see how the numbers come back as we go more into the fall. Let me ask you this, John. As these candidates visit the state, there's a lot of outside noise. You talked about the riots and whether the riots will impact Vice President Biden, even though the Vice President has condemned them. There's a lot of noise with Speaker Pelosi's visit to the hair salon, or the situation with Bob Woodward's book that just came out. Do these things impact everyday undecided voters?
Again, it's so tough to say, Sam. One thing that I can say for certain in comparison to this time, compared to 4 years ago, there's a whole lot less undecided voters at this point in time. Because I think a lot of voters, they've seen President Trump in office for nearly 4 years. And I think he is a figure where a lot of people, the people who love him, they love him. And the people who don't like him, they still don't really like him. So, again, he's just a unique, I guess, political figure in the sense that those who are passionate and loyal to him through any type of bad press or bad news cycle, they stay with him. And the same thing for those who dislike him. Let's say Trump's having a good week in the polls. Those who really dislike him remain to not like him. They had their vote made up. So that's one thing I will say. Those specific issues, sure, they'll capture a news cycle for a few days. Pelosi, like you mentioned, in the hair salon, or Bob Woodward's book, which, again, it's certainly newsworthy. These are things media outlets should report on them. There's no doubt this is nothing we should ignore. I'm just saying I don't know if it's something that the swing voter or the independent voter, if that's going to be the nail in the coffin for them saying, you know what, I need to vote for this candidate or that candidate. That remains to be seen. And again, there's a lot of undecided voters this time around at this point in time in comparison to 2016.
That's fair. That's very fair. So let me ask you this before we go to the break. President Trump won the state barely, but he won the state in 2016. What does the vice president have to do between now and Election Day to flip that?
Is that not the ultimate question? Ultimately, the question that could determine who is in the White House next year. I think Vice President Biden, again, when you look at trends across the state, and I think we will dive into this a bit more later in the show, is that the suburbs have been trending blue the past couple of years. It's actually been going for a while, but under President Trump, it seems that it's accelerated, that the suburbs are getting more blue. Biden needs to run up those numbers big time in the Philly suburbs if he's going to win. And he also needs to not lose as much ground in the rural areas that are really Trump-friendly. I mean, even a county like Biden's from, Lackawanna County, for example, Secretary Clinton won it by only 2 points when Barack Obama won it by more than 20. And the voter registration trends are going to the Republican Party in that region of the state. If Northeast PA in general just goes big-time red, it's going to be tough for Biden to win. So he needs to stop the bleeding in, the red trending areas, the Northeast PAs. Again, it's not plausible for him to win all those voters back. There's no way Lackawanna County is going to go back to voting for Biden by 20-plus points. But at the same time, if he can stop the bleeding in Northeast PA and some of the rural areas and put up big numbers in the suburbs of Philadelphia and, let's say, the Pittsburgh suburbs in Allegheny County, I think that would be the way that he can win. And also swing counties like Northampton County, Erie County. If you can win those counties and do what I said earlier, I think that's the way that Biden could win the state.
So if the Biden campaign is smart, they're going to tune in and listen to what John Cole has to say here. I think that's very good advice on your part. John, thank you for that breakdown. When we come back, I want to talk about some of the congressional races and some of the statewide races and how that might impact what we see on election night in 2020. So don't go away. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Face the Issues. And John, thank you again for joining us. Obviously, everybody in the country is talking about the election, and all the eyes are placed right here on the Keystone State in Pennsylvania. But there's more at stake in Pennsylvania than just the presidential election, and certainly the outcome of these other races could be impacted by the presidential election, and vice versa, could impact the presidential race. I want to start by actually asking about the statewide races. The three statewide row offices, the Attorney General's office, the Auditor General's office, and the Treasurer's office. Two incumbents, so State Treasurer Joe Torcella and State Attorney General Josh Shapiro, are up for re-election, but the Auditor General, Eugene DePasquale, is now running for Congress in the 10th District against Congressman Scott Perry, which leaves that an open seat. And your organization, Politics PA, recently did a story about how that race seems to be tightening more so than the other races. Why do you see that happening?
Well, I think we've talked about this. Anyone in politics knows how, there's something to the power of incumbency. it's name recognition and things of that degree, where to the average everyday voter who may not be as tuned in with the attorney general and the treasurer doing every day, at least they're familiar with the name Josh Shapiro. They're familiar with the name Joe Torcella. They might not know a ton about what they're doing in the office, but there's a familiarity of those names. When there's an open seat, it kind of gives a chance for a possible, to put it this way, for both candidates, let's talk about them. Republicans have Tim DeFore running from Dauphin County, and the Democrats have Nina Ahmad from Philadelphia. So you're talking about two people who, if you look at the polling or their name recognition statewide, they're, for the most part, most voters don't exactly know them, I guess, that well. Where polling, there's a Monmouth poll that came out, I believe it was either late August or early September, and it said that Josh Shapiro had close to a 10-point lead over Heather Heidelbaugh. Joe Torcella had, I think, a 5-point lead over Stacey Garrity, and the Auditor General's race between DeFore and Ahmad was about a 2 or 3 point race, meaning it's within the margin of error. And again, I think it's because an open seat, both candidates are relatively unknown to the state, and in this final sprint to the election, we're going to see how both candidates get their message out there, what part of the state do they campaign in, and how much do they spend on TV? Because that's a good way, of course, reaching the voters who don't exactly know about much. What does the Auditor General do and things like that. I think a good way is we'll see how they campaign in the final stretch, and also who goes on TV more. It'll be interesting to see that shape out.
That'll be interesting to play out. And the other thing also, of course, are the congressional races and very, very tight polling in some of these races. I want to ask you, a lot of, as we're now post-Labor Day, a lot of the attack ads are coming out, and everyone's starting to pay attention. So in places like District 1, Congressional District 1, the incumbent is a Republican, Brian Fitzpatrick, and being attacked for really being, rubber stamped for the president, which his voting record indicates he's not, and yet you see this repeated connecting the congressman to the president. Is it effective? Do you think it works this time? And what are your thoughts on how the voters respond to that?
So whether it'll work or not remains to be seen. However, this is a common trend in politics where, specifically in moderate competitive districts, you'll see that the opposing candidates try to attach them to figures in the opposing party that are or at least viewed as unpopular. So let's start with the first district, like you mentioned, in Bucks County. President Donald Trump narrowly lost Bucks County by, I think it was Secretary Clinton. And we've seen, just in general, the suburbs of Philadelphia have trended away from the Republican Party. And poll after poll has shown, and I'm talking Republican internal polls, the Democratic internal polls for the first congressional district. It's funny, Republican internal polls show Fitzpatrick up by like 10 or so, and Democratic internal polls show Christina Finella, the Democratic challenger, neck and neck with Fitzpatrick. So it's funny, you have two different polls coming out, one from Republicans, one from Democrats, but they can't seem to agree on who's leading the race for Congress. But one thing they seem to come to the same consensus on is that Biden is leading in Bucks County by nearly 10 points. Now, granted, there's a time where that could change. I don't want to say that it's set in stone Biden's going to win Bucks County by double digits, but trends seem to indicate that Biden's doing well there, and probably largely in part because Donald Trump's message is not resonating as well in Bucks County. So, of course, Christina Finella is going to try to attach Brian Fitzpatrick with Donald Trump, because if she can sway enough voters, maybe she could win that race. Again, it's an uphill climb because the Fitzpatrick name's known well in Bucks County. His brother, the late Mike Fitzpatrick, was in Congress for a while as well. They both kind of had a moderate image for Republicans, and that plays well in Bucks County. And if you want to shift gears, not only in the first district, you can talk about Republicans doing the same for Democrats, where in the 10th congressional district, Scott Perry is running against Eugene D. Pasquale, like you mentioned. So the Harrisburg area, there's some suburbs near there. That region is trending blue. Again, not as rapid as Bucks County, I would say, but it's starting to get more Democratic friendly. So what do you think Scott Perry's first ad of the campaign was? First television ad I'm talking about was not like a positive message from him. It was actually it was an attack ad against D. Pasquale, linking him to Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, the Green New Deal, and I think the defunding the police movement, which all three of those things, D. Pasquale has been on the record saying he's opposed. And don't just take my word for it, PolitiFact, being that the ad saying those attacks were also false as well. So again, it makes sense in politics where you're going to try to attach your opponent. If there's someone specific in that party that's not popular in that region, again, we'll see if it resonates, but you're going to try to attach them to them. Right. Where, again, in the 10th district, where Perry's trying to link Dee Pasquale to AOC and Nancy Pelosi, Jim Bognett up in Northeast PA trying to do the same thing for Cartwright, and Sean Parnell's trying to do the same thing to Connor Lamb. And that's why we're seeing in the 1st district, Pinello's trying to link Fitzpatrick to Trump, because Trump is not exactly that popular there.
Right. Let me ask you this, John. You look at a district like the 1st district or the 10th district, right? The 1st district trending blue, the 10th district trending a light blue, if you will, but still predominantly a fairly conservative. Even the Democrats there are a little bit more conservative or moderate than say, in Philadelphia. Yet, we look at President Trump, good chance of winning that 10th congressional district, and yet Dee Pasquale is really in a tight race against the incumbent Republican. Meanwhile, in the 1st district, you're saying Vice President Biden is looking to win that comfortably, yet Republican incumbent Mike Fitzpatrick seems to be in the lead, or at least in a very good position to win. What's the trend with ticket splitting? Is this something that we see among Pennsylvania voters, where they might vote for one party at the top of the ticket and then vote for a member of a different party down the ballot?
Depending on the county, it happens frequently. Depending on the county, I would say, like we've talked about before, your Philadelphias, your Pittsburghs, and they're an example of almost all the time that the Democrat. It's almost there's not a lot of ballot splitting there. You're gonna go straight party line there. And same thing in some of the more conservative rural regions of the state. It's going to be tough to find. I don't know. Let's go to like Lycoming County, for example. I don't foresee a lot of voters voting for Fred Keller there for Congress and then say, I'm voting for Joe Biden.
Sure.
It's unlikely in some regions of the state. However, in your moderate districts, I think there's a reputation for Pennsylvania voters that say, you know what? I might like what someone at the top of the ticket says, but you know what? Something about my local representative, it doesn't resonate with me as well. In Bucks County, we saw in 2018, for example, where Senator Bob Casey and Governor Tom Wolf won with ease in Bucks County. Yet, Brian Fitzpatrick still won re-election by a few points. Granted, it was a close election. So I'm not saying it's like Fitzpatrick won comfortably against Scott Wallace. That was a very close race. However, Casey and Wolf won comfortably in Bucks County, and yet they still voted for a Republican for Congress. So there's certain counties. Again, you look at your Bucks counties, I think like in Northampton County as well. So like there's areas of the Lehigh Valley, some in the Harrisburg region. I suppose there's some out in Western PA as well where, don't forget, Connor Lamb's district narrowly voted for Trump. Yet when he ran for office last time in 2018 against Congressman Keith Rothfuss, he won by double digits. I think it was 11 points. So, and that's a district that narrowly voted for Trump. So there's certain districts that if you play your cards right and if your messaging is tailored to the district, you can get voters to split their ticket.
As the former Speaker of the House, Tip O'Neill, would say, all politics is local. And certainly something that perhaps our presidential campaigns need to remember as they travel through Pennsylvania. John, thank you so much for that insight, for breaking down these questions for us. Don't go away. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Face the Issues. John, thank you again for joining us. It's always a pleasure to have you here. And everybody is concerned about 2020. All the eyes of the nation, not just the state, the nation's eyes are on the Keystone State, and we appreciate your time. John, I want to pivot to one of our favorite topics we'll talk about with you. Obviously, the sports season is back. In a weird way, we had the Kentucky Derby and the Major League Baseball's return and the NBA playoffs, the NHL playoffs, the NFL starting up, all at the same time. But it's been a long drought without live sports, and it's now back. You are a committed sports fan. You've been a sports broadcaster yourself. What does it feel like for you now that sports are back, and what do you hope to see going forward with that?
Well, obviously, I'm excited that sports is back, and I totally understand why you can't have fans in the stands for most of these events. Because, again, I think what is paramount during the coronavirus pandemic, as much as I love sports, and we talked about this at length before, Sam, I think people's safety is first, and where I'm happy that they've been able to, it seems as though right now, and I don't want to jinx it, as of now, they've been able to find a happy medium where athletes are able to play. They have enough, I guess, testing in place where the athletes can stay in their bubbles and things like that, or they can still go out there and play the sports. However, it doesn't make sense to have, I guess, a ton of fans in packed stadiums yet. But that's fine by me, though, right now, because, again, I can still go home on a Sunday afternoon to put on the Eagles game. And same thing for, the Phillies that are back. Despite bullpen woes that we've seen, it's nice to see the Phillies back on. Of course, we've seen the NHL, the Flyers had an early exit, as did the Sixers. But as a sports fan, it's nice to have that back. It's somewhat of a sense of a return to normalcy. Again, we're not really there yet. And again, safety is first and foremost the most important thing. So I want to stress that where, of course, it doesn't make sense to have fans in the stadium, at least a lot of fans in the stadium yet, and I understand that. But I'm saying as a fan, it is nice that they've been able to work it out thus far where we've been able to enjoy these games at our home. And hopefully testing gets better, and hopefully we're getting closer and closer to a time where there's a return to normalcy where we're kind of back into what it was before.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And I know you're a committed sports fan, as am I. And it certainly feels nice to be able to turn on the TV and see live action sports again. And of course, to your point, safety always comes first. We hope that we continue to move toward recovery, both from the pandemic and economically. And we hope that the next sports season comes and we're able to sit in those seats again. So, John Cole, thank you so much for joining us. And that is all the time that we have tonight. So my thanks to you for tuning in. Join us again next week as we unpack another issue. And until then, you can continue this conversation with us online. Just use the hashtag #FaceTheIssues. My name is Sam Chen. On behalf of all of us here at Face the Issues, thank you and good night.